Hi, this is Alimayo Arango, and today I would like to show you how to have a character take a weapon from off of their back. So let's get started. Okay, if this is your first time in Blender, I recommend you go to File, User Preferences, go to Input, and then choose Select with left click. Blender's default select is with right click, and this may confuse you if you're coming from Adobe programs or other 3D programs. Also, while you're in here, click on add-ons. Make sure that you have a check mark right here next to 3D view : 3D navigation. And then if you scroll all the way down, make sure that you have a check mark next to user interface : pi menus official. Okay, when you first come into Blender, you come in and it's object mode, so that's what we're in now. You can see which mode you're in by looking here. You can manipulate your view in Blender by holding your middle mouse button. You also can click on this navigation tab and then use these different buttons here to also manipulate your view. Okay, the idea for this video came from the fact that I was working on an animated scene, and in the scene, I have a low poly character with an axe on his back. Matter of fact, the axe comes from a tutorial where I just showed how to make that. I'll put a link up here so that you can get to that tutorial. As a matter of fact, this is the animation that I was working on here. And low poly character, comes up. He has the axe on his back, and then he, pulls the axe off of his back. So that's what I want to show you how to do now is to just show you how to go about having a character being able to easily take a weapon that's attached to his back, and take it from his back, and have it in his hand afterwards. Okay, so what we're going to do now is with this cube selected, we're going to press X and then select delete to delete the cube. We're then going to bring our low poly guy in here. So we're going to click File, then we're going to go to Append. And I have a folder named Tutorial Assets. So here is the file that I want. So I'm going to click here. When I click here, you see all of these different folder options. I'm going to go to Object. And then from here, I have these two options. This cube is basically the mesh of the character. This is the armature of the character. So I'm going to press A to select both of those options, and then I'm just going to select a pen from library. So here's our character, brought into the scene right there. Okay, currently our character is on this layer here. When I click here, it's going to look like the character disappeared. It's just because we're going into a different layer. So when I click there, we can see what's in this layer, which currently there's nothing is in this layer right now, which is good because that's what we want. Okay, now we're going to append, which basically is another way of saying bring an object from another file into this current file. So we're going to go to File and then click Append. I'm going to click Desktop and then look for the folder that I have that has the assets that I need. So I made a folder here called Tutorial Assets. I'll click on there. Then I'm going to click right here on this axe blend file. And then we can see all these various options right here. I'm then going to go to Object. And then I am going to have a camera with this object. I don't need that. So I'm just going to click here and then select Append from library. Okay, here's our axe here. I'm going to press and hold Shift, then press B, then draw a zoom box so you can see. So there's our axe right there. So we're currently on this layer here. So what I can do is I'm going to hold Shift and then select this layer as well. So now, because I held Shift, we can now see this layer as well as this layer at the same time. So we have our weapon as well as our character, which we can both see now. Okay, this character, I did a tutorial where I showed how to model this character. I'll put a link up for that. This character has a basic rig in it. I've got various rigging tutorials on this channel. I'll put a link up here so you can get to a tutorial that shows you how to rig a character that's fairly similar to this. That tutorial should give you the knowledge of how to rig this character. Okay, what we need to do now is we actually need to add an armature to this X. So what we're going to do is click here, and when I clicked there, just here, it took us back to seeing just what's in this layer. Here's our 3D cursor. So wherever your 3D cursor is at is where objects tend to come into Blender at. So what we're going to do is with this X selected, we're going to press and hold Shift, and then while holding Shift, press S, and then we're going to choose, when we did that, our Snap to selection, our Snap to menu, sorry, popped up. We're then going to choose Selection to Cursor Offset. So we got our X to jump right to our 3D cursor right here. Okay, the reason why we did that was you'll find that as you work in 3D, you'll tend to spend a lot of time, at least I find that you tend to spend a lot of time selecting and moving things around. So if you can generally have things set up to make things easier as far as bringing objects in that require less, adjusting, that's a good thing. So because our 3D cursor is here, I made the axe go right to the 3D cursor because the bone is going to come right to this 3D cursor, right? So that should make it easier as far as us setting up for the bone to be put inside of this X. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to the navigation tab. I'm going to click here to go to front view. I'm going to actually click here. If you see this says view perspective / ortho. Perspective is a view like you see here. It's like very close to you looking at something like you would look in real life. When I click this button, this is going to take us from front perspective mode, which you can see right here, we're in front perspective mode, to orthographic mode. Orthographic mode is kind of like a blueprint mode. It almost looks like you're looking on something in 2D on a flat piece of paper. So I'll click that now. And now you can see we're in orthographic mode again. You can look right here and see that that's where we're at. Orthographic mode tends to be very good, often for modeling as well as placing armature bones inside of something. So our armature bone is going to come right to this 3D cursor. So with our axe selected, I'm just going to pull this up to our 3D cursors at the bottom of our axe. I'm then going to press and hold Shift, then press A. This brings up our Add To menu. I'm then going to select Armature and then select Single Bone. So we can see here's our bone right here. Okay, and what we're going to do now that we have the bone right here is we're going to click here. So the bone is selected. That's important. So now with it selected, I'm going into Edit mode. So now I am in the Edit mode of this bone. Because in Blender, you have a bunch of different modes, but typically when you start off Blender, you have object mode. You move objects around. When you're going to manipulate parts of an object, which think of an object as being like one thing, you go into Edit mode. So we're actually going to add another bone in here, and we need to make some adjustments to this bone, so that's why we came to Edit mode. So I'm grabbing the head of this bone. I'm going to push this down. This. Okay, what we'll do now is we'll press the N key, which brings up our Properties panel. I'll scroll down here. So here is our armature, which is the name of our object, and then this individual bone is currently named bone. So we'll click here and we'll name this main, capital H, handle, and press Enter to lock that name in. Okay, now what we're going to do with this bone still selected is we're going to press and hold Shift, then press D, and then left click. Now when we did that, what we did was we just duplicated that bone, or this bone that we currently have selected. The duplicated bone is currently right on top of this one, so we'll just push this down. So now you can see there's that bone right there. I'm going to press S to scale this bone down like this. And then with this bone selected, we can see when we duplicated this bone, it still has the name, main handle, except now it says .001. We'll click here and we're going to name this root. You can name it whatever you want. I'm just naming it root bone, and just to show the separation between the letters, I do root and then, capital B for the bone. So anyway, I'm going to press Enter to lock that name in. Okay, so basically what's going on here is this bone right here we're going to use as the handle. So the character is going to grab this bone or this axe by grabbing this bone, which this axe is going to be parented to, right? Now this bone right here is what's going to allow the this bone to be attached to that character's back, if that makes sense. So we're going to take this bone, parent it to the armature of our character, and then we're going to use this bone to actually move the axe around. Okay, so when you go to animate bones, typically you do that in pose mode, right? So if I click here and then select pose mode, with this bone selected, if I hit G, only this bone moves. We need this bone to move when we move this bone. So the way we can do that is we can click here and then go back to edit mode. And then what we can do is first select this bone. The order is important as far as when you parent things in Blender. With this bone selected, we'll hold shift, and then while holding shift, we'll click here. So with this bone selected first, and then this bone, and now them both selected at the same time, we press and hold Control, and then we press P. And then our Make Parent option pops up. So then we'll choose Keep Offset. So now with that done, I'll press A to deselect. Now I'm going to click here, go into pose mode. So now when I click this bone here and I press G, see that? This bone follows that bone, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to parent this axe to this bone specifically. All right, so both of these bones together are considered the armature. All right, so that Blender knows to parent this axe just to this bone, what we're going to do is press A to deselect. Then we're going to click this bone right here, right? So we're still in pose mode. When I click this axe, that should take us out into object mode. However, it will take us, it being Blender, will take us into object mode with Blender remembering that we were previously selected on this particular bone right here. So I'm going to click the axe right now. You can see it being Blender took us into object mode. So remember, the order that you parent things is important. So we have this bone selected, and now we're going to hold shift and then click back on this. So just so you understand, for Blender, in one sense, it considers both of these bones as one object, which is the armature object. The reason why we clicked on this bone previously is so that Blender knows we don't want this axe parented to this entire armature, just to this particular bone right here. So again, with this bone selected and with us holding shift, which I'm holding shift now, we click here, and then Blender brings us back into pose mode, and it brought us back into pose mode with first the axe being selected and now this particular bone being selected. So now with that done, we can press and hold Control, then press P. Our Set Parent To menu pops up, and then we want to select Bone. Okay, I'm going to press A to deselect, and now when we click this bone right here and then I press G, we can see that our axe mesh follows along with our armature. So I'm going to right click to get this bone to jump back to its original position. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to hold shift and then click this layer right here so we can see our character. I'm now going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to hold Control and then hold the middle mouse button to zoom back. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view some more. We're currently in pose mode. It's very important as you work that you remember which mode you're in. I have this bone selected, the root bone. So what I'm going to do is push up, pull back so it, it being the axe is kind of in the position that we want. I'm now going to click this bone right here. I'm then going to press R to rotate on the Y axis 180, and then left click to lock in. I did that just because that was a fairly easy way to position the axe, in the direction that I wanted it to be. So now I'm going to take this manipulator, and pull the axe up almost into place. Okay, I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate some more. And what we need to think about right here is we have the action on the character's back. We need to make it so that this axe is fairly easy for this character to grab. So I'm going to pull the axe up some, like that. And we want to, make this axe fairly easy to grab. So I'm going to press R to rotate on the Y axis and tilt the axe like that. Push it over some. I'll push it down some, push it over some a little bit more. I'm holding the middle mouse button just to take a look. Okay, so we have the axe generally in the place that we need it to be. If I click here on the armature of our character, and then I click here and go into pose mode. If I click let me hold the middle mouse button, try to get a better view. If I click our root bone here, and then I press G, our axe, along with its own armature, remains in place. We don't want that. I'm going to right click to get this to jump right back into place. Okay, so to get our axe along with its armature to follow along with our character, we need to parent that armature to this armature here. However, we want to have the armature that's in our axe be parented right to this bone, so when this character, bends and moves around, that this moves as well. I'm holding the middle mouse button to rotate, and we want this root bone to be parented to here. Okay? So what we're going to do is, just like we did before, we need Blender to know that this is the bone that we want parented. So I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to click this bone right here. Okay? Okay, now I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm then going to click on this bone right here. Now, when we clicked on this bone, this took us into pose mode for this other armature, which is fine. You tend to parent things in object mode, edit mode, typically. However, you can also parent things in pose mode, particularly when dealing with bones. So with this selected, I'm going to hold shift and then select this armature right here. And you can see that armature bone particularly is lit up, which is what we want. So now what we're going to do is press and hold Control, then while holding Control, press P, and then our Set Parent To menu pops up. We're then going to select Bone. Okay, and with that done, I'm going to hold the middle mouse button. I'm going to grab our root bone for our character now. So now when I press G, you can see that the axe, as well as its armature, moves around with our character, which is exactly what we wanted. So I'm going to right click to get that bone to jump right back into place. Okay, so now that we have the axe attached to our character's back, how do we get the character to grab the axe from off of his back and bring it to its hand, and even better, to have it be able to be done easily? And that's what we're going to work on now. Okay, so currently we're in pose mode, which we can animate bones in pose mode. However, we're in Blender's default workspace. If we click here, we can see various workspaces that are set up to make things easier for us as far as working in Blender. We want to click where it says animation. So when I click this button, we'll be taken to Blender's animation workspace. And here we are. Okay, here's our character right here. So I'm going to hold shift, and then while holding shift, I'm going to press B. I'm then going to draw a zoom box to zoom in. So what we're about to do now is I'm going to take you through a simple animation where I show you how to have this character take the weapon from its back into its hand. Okay, as far as Blender's workspace, we have our 3D view right here. We've got another view right here, which is the camera perspective. The important things are we have our dope sheet right here. We have our F-curve editor right here. We have our timeline right here. So the way you animate things in Blender is by putting keyframes in for your bones. This is similar to how animation works. Yeah, actually, for the most part, as far as I know, Maya, Blender, 3ds Max, Cinema 4D, they work very similar. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're currently on frame 1, which is good. So we want to put our character in a somewhat, cool position. One of the things to take note of as far as working with animation in Blender, if you don't want to have a bone affected, what you can do is hide that bone. And then when you adjust other bones, you don't have to be concerned about that bone that you're not working with or that you don't want to work with to be put in a position that you don't want it to be in. So currently with this root bone selected, we don't need that right now. So I'm going to press H to temporarily hide that bone. And again, we hid that bone just so that we can work without being concerned about that particular root bone. Okay, let's make our character look like he's, getting ready for battle. So I'm going to hold Control and then hold him in the mouse button and push in to zoom in. I'm going to click here. I'm going to pull this leg out to the side. And you see how I'm going to hold him in a mouse button. See how I pulled his leg out to the side? One of the things that I really like about Blender's animation system, I'm going to hold my middle mouse here and pull to the side. I pulled this bone to the side, right? Now I very easily could grab this bone and do the same thing. However, with Blender, what we can do with this bone selected is if we click here, right? When I hover here, see that pop-up menu says, copies the current pose of the selected bone to copy/paste buffer, right? So I'm going to click here. So now with that bone selected, this is paste, all right? So if I click this, it would just paste the current pose back in. As far as our character. However, this is paste the stored pose on the current pose. However, this pose, if you look down there, it says flipped equals true. Long story short, this paste the opposite pose. So when I click this, see how the other bone on the other side jumped to this position. So it's a small thing, but I like it. I find that whenever you do things like animation or selecting, it's amazing how cutting off a few seconds adds up as you work on a project. Anyway, with the legs selected like that, we spread the legs on a character as far as battle because, typically if you are getting into something where you're going to be in a situation where you might be fighting, it's going to be a good idea to have better balance and, spreading your legs out tends to make your balance better. So what I'm doing now is I'm grabbing this bone right here. Let me press T. Go to Options. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I had Auto IK turned off for now. Very cool option. I'll tell you about that in a minute or so. I'm going to press T to take away that option. So with this bone here selected, I'm just going to push down and, to have our character, bend its legs some. Holding them in a mouse button to turn to this side. I'm going to select this control bone right here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the Z axis to have this character's leg turn some. I'm then going to copy the pose, and then when I click this, it'll paste that small movement I did to the other leg, which you can see it just did right there. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we want our character to bend forward some, so I'm going to bend forward some. So I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis, and we have our character, bending forward. See, our character's head is following this bone. I don't want that, so I'm going to click here, and then I am going to actually click here. Wait a second. Hold them in the mouse button just to get more space. See this right here? This says inherit rotation. Let me hover here and pull this to the side. So this check mark means that this bone right here will inherit the rotation of the next bone that it's connected to, right? So when I unclick this, this bone will no longer inherit the rotation of this bone, which is very hard to see, as well as this bone. So I'm going to click that, and typically when you're posing characters, I find it extremely useful to have this option without a check mark there. Okay, without getting too into it, these yellow bones right here are IK bones, which stands for inverse kinematics. Sounds. I like how it sounds because it sounds complicated. It's not that complicated. Basically, they allow you to, when we clicked here and pushed down, because we have IKs on here, these legs bent. long story short, if I click this bone right here, right, and I press R to rotate on the x-axis, this arm moves forward. This arm works by what's called FKs or forward kinematics, and what that means is that I like to explain things as far as rigging as far as like dealing with an action figure. When I rotate this, it's almost like imagine this pointer was my finger, right? And I had an action figure, and I grab the action figure's arm, and I pull from here, right? There's advantages to doing that. However, there's also advantages to me being able to grab the hand and just pull this into place. So imagine FK is like, okay, you grab from like almost like I guess you would say the start of the arm would be FK, and then IKs are like you grab from a particular piece. You're like, okay, why is he telling me all this? Why is he telling me this stuff? The reason why I'm telling you this is because this had to be set up, which we're not going to do now. Like I said, that other tutorial I gave you the link to should tell you how to do that. However, if we want to pose this character's arms quicker, what we can do is we can press the T key, which brings up this tool menu. And then if we go to options, see this thing says auto IK. That's why I was telling you about the IKs. Because we have the option of instead of me, bending from here and then bending here and then bending the wrist to get this arm into place, we can actually turn on this thing called auto IK, right? You can see somebody's out there like, there he goes, Ali's rambling on as usual. No, this is pretty cool. Well, maybe not no to rambling, but anyway, so here's auto IK. So we don't have it turned on right now, right? So hopefully this will make you understand how cool this is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold control and hold the middle mouse button to zoom in, right? See this bone right here? With this bone selected, if I pull up, you see that? I'm pushing up with the manipulator, right? And our arm is not moving, right? If I move it around, only that one particular bone is moving, okay? The reason why that one particular bone is moving is because that bone has no IKs on it. It's an FK bone, so when I select it, it will only move, itself and then the things that are parented to it. That's why the fingers are moving with it. So I'm going to right click, right, to get out of what we were doing there. However, with this bone still selected, watch what happens when I put a check mark here next to auto IK. So now, same bone. Now when I take the manipulator and pull up, see that? There we go. Tell me that's not nice. So instead of moving this and this and this, now with auto IK, we just select this, pull up, and the entire arm moves. Pretty cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is hold control, then hold the middle mouse button to pull back. Pull this out to the side like that. I'm going to hold shift and the middle mouse button. I'm going to hold control and the middle mouse button to zoom back. Okay, so when dealing with IKs, the way I showed you how you could copy a pose and then paste the opposite pose for the other leg, to get that to work as far as when you're dealing with auto IK, you would take the bone that you want to have set up for auto IK, position the bone, get it into position, position that you want, and then you'll unclick auto IK, and then now after unclicking, now you can, I'm going to hold them in the mouse button here, just pull to the side. Now I can copy the pose, and then, oh, look at that. Oh, okay, here we go. Yeah, because auto IK, the way it works, because of the way it works, what you want to do is take all of the bones here. So we'll press C, select all of these bones here. I'll right click to get out of paint select. Now I'll copy the pose. Now I'll paste the position of all of these bones to this other arm right here. Okay, now with that posing done, we have our first pose set up. So now I'm going to hover my mouse here. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button and pull towards the side. And this is a nice thing because what we can do is select all of our bones and then hit I and then select where we want to, what we want to be keyframed. However, the more I use Blender and the more I animate, I tend to like to go to here. You click here, and then from here, I'm going to choose location rotation. And what this means is now when I select a group of bones and then I press I, Blender will automatically put a location rotation in for all of those bones that are selected. Okay, so what we want to do now is we're going to press A, which deselected those bones there. Now we're going to press A again to select all of the bones. Now we're going to press I. And what that did when we press I was a keyframe was set in to record the location as well as the rotation for all of these bones. Okay, so what we want to do now is I'm going to hover my mouse here. The reason why I am saying to hover the mouse here is your shortcuts tend to change in Blender depending on what you're hovered over. So with your mouse hovering over the timeline, I'm going to press and hold shift, and then I'm going to press up on my arrow key once. What that did was that made me jump forward 10 frames. I'm still holding shift. I'm going to press up again. That made me jump forward another 10 frames. And I am going to hold shift and then press up again and then up again one more time. So that brought us to frame 41. You could do what I just said and hold shift and press up to do that, or you could just come right here and just type in 40. So I'm going to click here to go to 40. We still have all of our bones selected, so I'm going to press I to put a keyframe in of the position of as far as the location rotation of these selected bones on frame 40. Okay, the reason why we did that is we have our start pose here and then our end pose. A lot of times you'll find that you can build a decent amount of an animation with the same pose, the start pose and end pose. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now with that set up, what we want to do is I'm going to right click here and drag to frame 20. Okay, with that done, I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to click here to turn the auto IK back on. I'm going to press and hold shift and press B. I'm then going to draw a zoom box right here. I'm going to click here. I'm then going to press the end panel to bring up our properties menu. I'm going to scroll down. I can see that this bone is named hand.L. Okay, I'm going to press N to take away the properties panel. I'm going to hold control in the middle mouse button and pull back to zoom back. I'm going to hold shift in the middle mouse button to pan. I'm now holding control in the middle mouse button again to pan back again. Now I'm holding shift in the middle mouse button to pan, or it's hold control, hold the middle mouse button, pull back to zoom back, and then hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. Sometimes my words get confused. The pressure of the camera, even though I'm not on a camera, trust me, you make these tutorials, you still feel the pressure of the camera. Anyway, this bone that's on our axe, I'm going to click that bone, and then I'm going to press H to temporarily hide that bone, just because I expect for that to get in the way. Okay, now we're going to click back on our armature for our character mesh. Okay, I'm going to press A to deselect. I want to select that bone right there. I don't want to zoom in though. So what I can do is go to our outliner window here, hold the middle mouse button, pull to the side. I can click here, and then I can type in hand. When I type that in, you can see these options popped up. I'm going to scroll to the side here, then I'm going to scroll down, and then hand.L is right there. I'm going to click there, and now you can see we were able to fairly easily get back to that bone as far as selecting it. Okay, what I'm going to do now is hold the middle mouse button. I'm going to push this arm forward some. I'm then going to push up some like that. I'm then going to push this into place to set it up for grabbing that axe right there. I'm now going to I'm not sure if I have to, but I'm going to unclick auto IK. I'm going to click this bone right here. Now I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis. to get this arm to go back. Then I'm going to left click to lock that in. I'm going to hold them in the mouse button and take a look. I'm going to press A to deselect, A to select all of the bones. Then I'm going to press I to insert a location rotation for all of these bones. We're not done with the pose yet. However, be aware that if you are working on setting up poses and then you don't have a keyframe in for your bones, but you took the time to set up a pose, if you go to save and then reopen a file, if you don't have a keyframe on those bones, you're going to lose that work that you did on that pose. So even if you're not done the final pose, a lot of times it's good to insert a keyframe so that the pose will be remembered by Blender. Okay, so I'm going to press A to deselect. We still have our bone right here, which makes it easy to select our hand bones. We're going to click here. We want to push this down in the position to grab this axe, so we're going to turn the auto IK back on by putting the check mark back here again. Okay, I'm going to hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan down. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view some. I'm going to take the manipulator and push this down and push this over to the side some. I think I'm going to press R to rotate that. I'll push this a little bit more into place. I'm going to press A to deselect, then A to select everything. Then I'm going to press I to insert a location in so that Blender remembers the work that we've done on this pose so far. Okay, I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to hold control on the middle mouse button to zoom back. I'm going to click here, which is our head bone. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis to tilt the head forward some. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button just to take a look. I'm going to press the N panel to bring up the properties panel. I'm going to click here and then click only render just so I can get a look and see if our hand looks like it's in a decent placement. Looks like it needs a little bit of adjusting, so I'm going to click here. I'm then going to click here. I'll just pull the hand back some. Click only render again. Unclick this. Hand over a little bit more. Holding them on the mouse button to take a look. Okay, I'm going to move that like that. Hold them in the mouse button just to see other angles of this. I'm going to click here. I'm going to click the head. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis to tilt the head forward some more. I'm going to left click to lock that in. I'm going to press A to deselect, A to select everything. I'm then going to press I to insert keyframes for all of the bones right there. Okay, what I'm going to do now is press A to deselect. I'm going to press N to take away the properties panel. I'm going to hold them in the mouse button and take a look. Okay, and that's fine for now. So I'm going to press A to select the bones. I pressed A to select the bones in this case just so I could see all of the keyframes. So now what's cool is when I hover the mouse here, hold the right mouse button. Okay. So that's an issue. Okay, so the character goes from the pose, but they're actually bringing the arm back instead of forward. So what we need to fix that is we need to have a pose that actually leads this back towards that middle pose. So what we're going to do is what we're going to do, what we're going to do is press A to deselect. We're going to click here to select that arm. We're going to push this here. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button. I'm just adjusting the view so I can see what's going on. Push this forward some. I'll press R to rotate on the Y axis here. And I'm just trying to get a pose so that I can get Blender to, I'm going to click here, get Blender to move in the direction that I want. So we have the start pose, the finish pose, the in-between pose. Now we're putting an in-between pose for getting from our start pose to our original in-between pose. So I'm going to press A to deselect and A again to select everything, then I to insert a keyframe for all of the bones here. Okay, so let's I'm gonna hold shift and middle mouse button to pan, hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. So our character goes up and then the arm starts to go the other direction. So what we're actually gonna do is go here, and I guess that's can be an issue with the IK. I'm going to hover here, then press the home key to zoom in on these keyframes here. What we're actually going to do is we're going to click here, click the top of here. When we click the top of here, we selected all of those keyframes. We're then going to press X to bring up our delete menu. We're then going to delete those keyframes there. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to turn off the auto IK. I'm now going to click here, press R to rotate on the X axis to bring this up. Then I'm going to press R to rotate on the Y axis to move this into place like that. Okay, I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to take a look. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis to go like this. And left click to lock in. Holding the middle mouse button. I'm going to press A to deselect and A to select everything, then I to insert keyframes for all of those bones in that position. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is select this bone. I'm going to press R to rotate on the Y axis. Then I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I press R to rotate on the X axis a little bit more. I'm going to press pressed and held R to rotate. Sorry, I just pressed and held the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to press N to bring up our properties panel. I'm going to select only render. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to press T to take away the toolbar there. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate. And that doesn't look bad. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan the view. Okay, we're going to click here so we can see our bones again. I'm going to press R to rotate on the Y axis a little bit more. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to press A to deselect, A to select all the bones, I to insert keyframes for all the bones. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to hold the right mouse button. Good, so now he's reaching back. It's not bad. Okay, so he reaches back. Let's take his head. Press R to rotate on the X axis. Press A to deselect and A to select all of the bones. By the way, when you see me do this, I'm going to press I. I'm putting keyframes on all of the bones as well as bones that don't necessarily need to have a pose on them. Blender did a very cool thing, I think it was 2.76, where even though I'm putting keyframes on all of these bones, I can select all of these keyframes, I can press X, and then I can select an option called Clean Keyframes. And what that will do is the bones that haven't been affected from poses, when I press Clean Keyframes, it will take the keyframes off of the bones that don't need to have keyframes on them, which is cool. So you can kind of put keyframes on bones without being too concerned about your dope sheet getting too messy because of Blender providing an easy way to get rid of unnecessary keyframes. Okay, so what I want him to do is when I go here, see how his hand is like coming through his head? So what we're going to do is I'm going to hold the middle mouse button. We're going to grab here. We're going to press R to rotate on the X axis. Bring it back behind his head. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to click here, then press R to rotate on the Y axis. We'll make it so he's bringing that axe up to try to clear his head. So I'm going to press A to deselect and A to select everything. We're on frame 29, which is fine. I'm going to press I to insert a keyframe there. I mean, you could have put it to frame 30 if you wanted to be an even 10, but you can fairly easily, like if that, which sometimes I'll be like that, like it's on frame 29, right? What you can do if that bothers you and you want it on frame 30 is you can actually click here and then click here, then press G and then move this and then left click. So by clicking the top here, you select all of your keyframes. So now, even though we set the keyframe for frame 29, now all of these keyframes are on frame 30. Okay, so we're going to hold the middle mouse button and see. So we have our start keyframe. He goes back. That looks pretty good. Okay. Somebody's like, I'm sitting here watching all this stuff and he still didn't grab the axe. It's like, go. Trying to, set it up, make it look halfway decent. So let's go on to the axe part now. So we now go to here, frame 20, right? So now we need the character to actually move this axe from his back into his hand. So I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hover here to give us some more room. See those two arrows right there? When I see that, I can left click and drag and pull this panel to the side some. I'm now going to hold control of the middle mouse button to zoom back some. I'm going to hover here, then pull to the side some to shrink this panel some. Okay, so we have the timeline set for being on frame 20, which is where we want our axe to be grabbed. What we're going to do now is hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. Okay, now what we need to do is to unhide the armature for working with our axe bone and the armature that's connected to our axe bone. So these eyes right here show visibility. So when you see an eye, the object is visible, right? So what we're going to do is click here, click backspace. We're going to search for that bone that our axe is actually connected to. So I'm going to type in main, and just from typing in the word main, here is our actual axe bone. You can see right here that this eye icon isn't highlighted, so we're going to click here, and when I clicked here, it just brought us into this menu. So now I'm going to click there, and now we can see our axe bone there. Okay, so with that axe bone visible, what I'm going to do is press A to deselect. I'm going to click here to select that. I'm going to hover here and hold the middle mouse button. So we're in pose mode. So now what we need to do is we need to add a constraint to that axe bone. Okay, and what that constraint is, or how we can get to that constraint is we'll click here and we see this thing that says add bone constraint, or this selection that says add bone constraint. We'll click here, and what we need is right here, the child of constraint. So we'll click here. So now that child of constraint is applied to the main handle of our armature, which our axe is parented to. Okay, and what the child of constraint does is it allows you to copy the location, the rotation, as well as the scale along all of these different axes of the bone that you choose to be the parent. So what we're going to do is we're going to click here, and then we need to select MetaRig. And now MetaRig is the object of our character's armature. So we'll click that first, right? So now that we have the MetaRig selected, now what we can do is pick the actual bone. So we'll click here, and then we can just put H, and then here's our hand.L. So we'll click that, and you can see right here that when we did that, our armature bone that is controlling our axe jump forward. Don't let that get to you. We'll scroll down a little bit, And all we have to do is select here where it says set inverse. Now what should happen is when I click set inverse, that armature bone that our axe is parented to should jump right back into place. So, and it did. Okay, I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate back towards the front. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. I'll click on to our meta rig. I'm going to press A so we can see all of our bones. So now when I right click and drag, you can see the axe is actually in the hand. And then when I scrub through, it goes like it's going to grab, the axe off of the back. However, you're like, okay, why does it have it being our character have the axe in its hand there? Well, we need to set up to animate when this child of constraint that is applied onto the armature that our axe is connected to, we need to set up when that constraint activates, and that's what we're going to do now. Okay, and the way we do that is basically we know that on frame 20 is when we reach, right to the point where we want to grab the axe, right? So we make sure we're on frame 20. We can, move our timeline indicator, which is this green bar, to frame 20 here. We can see right here we're on frame 20. Now I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to select our armature. All right. So here is our child of constraint settings. This influence, see where it says 1.000. When I look at this, the first thing I think of is it looks like 1000 to me. Think of this as being 100. So think of this as being this add bone constraint is set for 100% to work at all times right now. So currently we are on frame 20, right? We want this influence to be where it's at. So in Blender, you can, not every menu, but almost every menu, or let's put it this way, a huge amount of menus you can animate simply by hovering your mouse over that menu and pressing I. So what we're going to do is hover our mouse here. We're on frame 20, so we press I to insert a keyframe for this setting. So what we did was we just told Blender, look, at frame 20, we want the influence for this child of constraint to be set for 100%. Okay, so at frame 20, which is where our character reaches back to grab the axe, currently our influence is set for 100% for our child of constraint to, be working on our armature bone that our axe is attached to. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to click here. So now we're on frame 19. So we don't want this child of constraint influence to be set at 100 here. We want this to be set for 0. So we take this down to 0 just by clicking and dragging. You can also click and enter the value of 0 in. Then we hover our mouse here and then press I to put a keyframe for that value to be 0 at frame 19. Okay, so I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan the view. So now I'm going to click here. Then I'll click here to go back to frame 1. In frame 1, you can see that he no longer has the axe in his hand. And then what I'm going to do is right click and drag, and you can see as he reaches back, he comes up to frame 20. Once he comes to frame 20, that keyframe activates to turn the child of constraint up to 100%, and he grabs the axe and now has the axe in his hand. So what I'm going to do is drag this timeline, still with my hand on that right mouse button, to frame 60, and then I am going to press E so that our timeline just goes to frame 60. Okay, so now I'm just going to click here to get the timeline to go back towards the or to the first frame. Then I'll click play, and we can see the timing, and there it goes. So I'm going to click here to pause this. I'm then going to hover here, pull this out to the side, click only render. Okay, then I'll click here to go back to frame 1, then I'll click play. And there it goes. You can see him grabbing the axe from his back. Let me pause this. See that right there, that little distortion. Since that's there, let me show you how to quickly deal with that. That's just a little minor weight painting issue. However, it's something you might deal with something because he's like, flexing his arm, pretty strongly. So I'm going to click here. And then to fix that, what we can do is just click this bone right here. I'm then going to click on the mesh. And then because we selected that bone, Blender knows that's the previous bone we were dealing with. Now I'm going to press and hold Control, then press the Tab key. This brings us into the weight paint mode of Blender. Okay, with this bone highlighted, I'm going to click here and then go to Edit mode. In Edit mode, we can see our armature is, here, and our mesh is in its, regular position. We can click here and then actually scroll down and click here and then here. So now our armature is actually not our armature. Our mesh is in the pose of our armature. Let me click here. This button allows you to select multiple faces. I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to click here, and this you can see we have vertex groups set up for our bones. When we scroll down, we can see here's the name of the bones vertex group, right? Okay, and you can see right here is the issue area. So actually what we can do is we're going to click here, scroll down, unclick these two buttons right here temporarily, then go to face select right here. Okay, then with face select on, I'm going to hold Alt and then select right here. So by holding Alt, we selected all of the faces, this loop of faces right here. I'm going to press and hold Shift, then press B, then draw a zoom box right here to zoom in. I'm now going to press C for paint select, and I'm then going to paint these faces right here. I'm now going to right click to get out of paint select. Okay, now I'm going to hold Control, then hold the middle mouse button to zoom back. I'm now going to hold Shift and middle mouse button to pan. I'm then going to click here and then click here to turn that back on. Now I'm going to click here, and because we have that area selected there, what we can do now is with this weight set for 1.000 or 100, we can just click sign, and now that issue is dealt with. Okay, so I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to click here, go back to object mode. I'm going to click here. I'm then going to click here. I'm then going to select only render. I'm then going to press N to take away that property panel right there. Okay, now I'm just going to click play, and there you go. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view some. I'm going to hold Control and the middle mouse button to zoom back some. Hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. Okay guys, that's it for the tutorial. For all of those of you out there who like the videos on this channel and reshare them, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Also, to those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel and you would like to see more, please subscribe. Also, if you would like to support this channel, you can support this channel in a few different ways. One of the ways is by clicking on the eye to the upper right corner of the screen and leaving or giving a donation to this channel. Giving donations helps as far as having motivation to make more tutorials. It also allows me to have more time to make more tutorials. Another way you can support this channel is by following me on Instagram as well as on Twitter. If you click on the subscribe button to the lower right hand corner, that will actually take you to the home page where people who aren't subscribed can choose to subscribe. You also should be able to see my Instagram as well as my Twitter buttons. So for all you guys that are watching this video, again, thank you for watching the video. If you do choose to support this channel in one of the ways that I mentioned, thank you even more. And as always, guys, thanks for viewing.